Hello, everybody. It is time for the news with Russel Brand. Oh no, that body.
Love you, whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever you've done, there's a way back home. No matter where you're watching this right now, the whole show will only be available on Rumble. After about 10 minutes, we'll click over onto just that platform because we talk about things that require an absolute commitment to freedom of speech. If you're going to attack powerful establishment forces, you need that guarantee. Hello, those of you that are watching us on Locals. That's our members community. People like Ashella, she's saying, get well soon. Oh, they just talk to each other on that chat. They're talking to each other.
I was going to say, are you ill?
I'm fine. I think so. Yeah.
Unless
hello.
she knows something that you don't.
Oh, no. Is it plain? It's written all over my face. We've got a fantastic show for you today, so it's really worth staying for the entire hour. First of all, we're talking about the literal Biden train wreck. His presidency has been a train wreck for some time, and now there's an actual, sadly, tragic environmental disaster of a train wreck to sort of almost epitomise it. It seems that in some ways that administration is culpable for not taking necessary safety measures and also for not paying workers enough and reneging on a promise to be a pro-worker president. We were talking about that aspect in particular. NATO and Ukraine, they need some more ammo now. They've not got enough. No. And also we're going to be talking to you about a sort of recent revelation that Zelensky said he never was going to obey that Minsk agreement anyway. He never cared about the Minsk agreement.
No.
He never cared about it. It takes two to tango, doesn't it?
Certainly does, Ross.
Can't have a tango with one person, they just look weird. When it comes to just clicking over to Rumble...
Tried.
It's not a tango, it's a rumba. It's a rumba. When we click over to just being on Rumble, we're going to tell you this unbelievable tale of, well, the WHO have just admitted they're not going to try and find out where COVID come from anymore. It's too hard. Well, I'm to follow the science. I followed it. I don't know where it's gone down. It's gone down a mouse hole. Where is it? Where's that science gone? And towards the end of the show, we're talking to my actual meditation teacher, leader of the David Finch Foundation. Maybe leader's not the right word. That makes it sound more like a cult than I bet they would like. Bob Roth, the man that taught me to meditate, taught you to meditate.
Yep.
One of us kept it up. You can tell by the beads which one it was. And only the beads, actually. There's certainly no accompanying serenity, wisdom, or insights to distinguish us. On our presentation, here's the news. We're going to be talking about pandemic profiteers. You're going to be astonished when you learn some of the people that earned extraordinary profits during the pandemic period. And the reason I was astonished, and I guess, probably we're similar in some ways, you and me, is because there's the people that were right mouthing off during the pandemic about exactly what we should do. Oh, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. They were piping up with all sorts of schemes. Turns out they made a load of money, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. But don't worry, because the mainstream media is along with some suggestions with how you can cope with impecunious circumstances, how the old penury needn't be a problem for thee.
Don't you worry about a thing, it's fine.
The Wall Street Journal have this suggestion for how you can cope economically in a time of crisis.
Is it challenge government powers?
Yeah, well, here's a few things it could be.
Right.
You've got to look at how corporate interests and the government cooperate to ensure that ordinary people never have a chance to alter or penetrate the system. That's one thing you could do. You could
That's a headline.
organise, collectivise together to confront establishment power.
Yeah.
I suppose that's one way of doing it. Recognise that self-sufficiency to some degree is going to be necessary as institutions and the faith in them continues to collapse.
Localization.
Localization. Run your own communities democratically, grow your own food, connect to people heart by heart, join a community like the locals community that we belong to. Let's see if that's what the mainstream media...
Probably is that.
The Wall Street Journal, owned in part by Jeff Bezos.
That's the Washington Post, that is.
They're all the same, aren't they?
Yeah.
All the bloody same. Wall Street Journal, in order to save money, you should skip breakfast. There you go. Eat less
That's the
food.
plan.
Eat less.
You can't afford to eat, you poor bitch.
So poor, life's so hard. Have you ever considered you might be being greedy? That thing you do in the morning, remember that? Maybe not that. Also, there's a whole host now of, we are on this show, friends of Clip Clop. Clip Clop is the AI robot dog that will shoot you as soon as look at you. He's being you see him everywhere these days. He's appearing at the Super Bowl.
That is
He's
so
a member
scary.
of the police force. I think he's at Delaware. He's cropped up somewhere. Well, now China,
this
they
one.
got their own Clip Clop, and I think actually their Clip Clop looks a bit better than American Clip Clop. So when it comes to the kickoff, which, if these balloons keep floating by at this rate, global Armageddon is inevitable, necessary, some would say. Let's have a look at, this is Chinese Clip Clop. Look at him, he looks
I heard the
hardcore.
agenda was like 10 years ago. Purposefully planned
Stupid
apocalypse.
run, hasn't he?
It's the familiar tip-tap, isn't it?
Clip Clops, wherever they're from in the world.
Yeah, so I can't believe it was like that this long ago, but it really was. It was like back in 2011, 2012, 2012, somewhere around there. I remember hearing a bunch of talk about the globalist agenda. You just hearing more and more of that lately, but one of the more radical things I remember hearing around that time, which starting to make more and more sense, to be honest, crazily enough. I'm not saying it's true, I'm just saying a little scary how much evidence is piling up. But the globalist agenda includes a World War III scenario that allows for the reduction of the global human population down to 10%. So, going from, where are we at? Like almost 8 billion people now? Hold on, let us do the daddy Google. So, global population. Yeah, 8 billion. Okay. So we're right at about 8 billion now. We've been climbing up that direction for a while. Talking about the deaths of 7.2 billion people. That's a planned measure to establish a quote-unquote stable global economy. Which is absolutely fucking insane, considering we already have the technology to support everybody on this planet. The climate situation is practically a scientifically verified hoax. We're not sure on whether or not humans are impacting climate in a significant way, and we're not sure at what kind of rate of climate change we might see. But we have shown factually that the whole climate situation has been blown way out of proportion on purpose. They used falsified evidence, basically, to push most of the claims that are being pushed in the mainstream media right now. Jordan Peterson did a talk with an actual climate scientist about it. Really good. I'll drop a link for that chat, I guess. But yeah, let's get back to this first.
Have a common gate. I wonder if these clip-clops at some point during a sort of a Terminator 2 style war might think, hang on a minute, why am I killing them clip-clops over there?
Right.
Just because they've got different colour clothes on to me? Aren't we all the same beneath the surface? What if all the clip-clops go, hey, we, instead of in a kind of introversion of the, or an inversion rather, of the typical expected sci-fi dystopian step, they go, we want peace.
Yeah. They have a
Skynet realised the humans were silly and they had to look after them.
They have a little game of football maybe on Christmas Day.
Christmas Day, the clip-clops come out. That's a piece of World War I mythos for English and German people that on Christmas Day, people realised temporarily that the war was pointless and played football. It was like, in a sense, I suppose it's one of the great metaphors, that war is unnecessary. It doesn't help anybody. Sooner or later, people are going to stop and come to a diplomatic solution.
Try telling that to NATO, Russ.
I have tried telling them it. They don't want to listen. They want some more ammo. But before we do that, let's have a look at one more clip-clop, Russian clip-clops. Russian clip-clop, I think, is a bit more arachnoid, and I would have to say a bit more sexy. It's like a sexy, velvety clip-clop. If you had to have sex with a clip-clop, and the day may come when
it's almost like it's wearing a
because what are you going to do
suit.
if clip-clop, take your temperature, get in your house, or whatever. You look nice, sir. Have you undone that shirt next before to get me going? Clip-clop, why are you looking at me like that? Clip-clop. And I know that when clip-clop ejaculates, he would step back.
Of course he would.
Like that, wouldn't he? He'd judder himself backwards, all scared of his own effluvia.
It's true to life.
Yeah. Who among us hasn't shuddered backwards in astonishment at our own productivity? I made this. Let's have a look at Clip-Clop, the velvet-clad little perv. Do you think of Russian folk music?
I'm not sure in this context.
Because that's not a merry jig.
It's not, is it? Yeah. I'm scared by this.
Well, you can bet.
It's like that thing where they put nursery rhymes in horror films. It's like the two don't go together.
Round and round the mulberry bush, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh shit, what's going on here, man? This is spooking me. Hey, you know that Minsk agreement? What Minsk agreement? The agreement where Ukraine was going to stop the fight in Donbass. They were going to stop it. They were going to stop that fight in Donbass, but apparently Zelensky never had any intention of obeying it or going along with it. And this, look, there it is. We've got that story there. He said, look, he didn't plan on implementing them agreements. That it was the agreement that sought to end the Donbass war. Now, have a look at this. NATO want bloody more weapons. You're aware of this, even if you watch mainstream news, if you're still imbibing that toxic claptrap, no good stuff for you getting into the soil like train wreck fluid. Ukraine's military is consuming more ammunition than Western countries are providing almost a year after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion. NATO's General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg said, anyway, give us some more weapons is what he wants.
Yeah,
ammo.
I guess the issue with this is if Zelensky's saying at this point that he never intended to implement those agreements, and we literally discovered last week, didn't we, by Naftali Bennett, that the peace deals were blocked and scuppered by Western leaders. It doesn't bode well for peace at this stage.
Look, why don't we just have a guess when peace will come? What it'll be, they have to, because they have to at some point come to peace, so that the Black Rock reconstruction can take place.
Sure.
Sometimes I see a bit of mainstream news and I'm reminded of the horror that there is an actual war going on, that Ukraine is under attack, like ordinary people's lives are being destroyed and decimated. It's really
people are
a total
suffering.
downer. But we sort of tend to focus here on how it's being reported in the mainstream in order to have a more rounded opinion on the conflict. And ultimately, however you look at it, you've got to be urging a diplomatic solution as soon as possible. Donald Trump says he could have one in 10 seconds, doesn't he, or something like that.
It would be nice.
Day.
I think he said it'd get done on the same day, didn't he, if he was back in power.
God bless him.
I don't know, it's tricky. You've got Zelensky vowing to retake Crimea, and Russia saying that would spark nuclear war. You know, there are, whilst you're saying it has to come to a resolution at some point, the signs are that this is just going to continue. You've got NATO calling for more weapons. You've got Lloyd Austin saying he wants to weaken Russia.
What I think it's about is that I think that ultimately Zelensky will only be backed as long as his interests converge with globalist, corporate, military-industrial complex interests. If there's a bifurcation of those interests, then Zelensky's power is redundant. We talked yesterday at length to Michael Racy-Tracy, who told us what began, he described the phenomena of mission creep. Plainly, the aid at the commencement of the conflict was about humanitarian aid,
today.
and he used the example, it was likely things like blankets and nourishment and nutrition. Then the phrase
you think of,
lethal aid entered the lexicon, and it became clear that what the West, and in particular the America, but even more accurately, the military-industrial complex were doing was arming Ukraine and using this as an opportunity, in my opinion, to profit from this conflict. I reckon it will go on for a little bit longer. I hope it ends as soon as possible, but it seems to be being governed by economic interests rather than the humanitarian ones that were used at the outset.
Pick up the scraps.
Also, like Angela Merkel said in an interview in December that the Minsk Accords were signed to give Ukraine time to strengthen itself. So it's another one of those stories that backs up this idea that this wasn't something that just started last year, that this goes back to 2014, this goes back to when these was signed, and Zelensky now admitting that he never intended to honour them just shows this is something that's been building from 2014 onwards.
There you are. Let us know what you think in the chat and the comments about how this story is being told, and how do we square our knowledge about what's happening and how the conflict has been engineered and perhaps misrepresented with the ongoing need of people that are suffering as a result of this war. It's something that I find difficult to, I don't know, to sort of handle, I suppose. Hey, what about that train wreck? I don't mean Joe Biden's presidency in general. I mean this literal, bloody, terrible Ohio train disaster. I know loads of you think that the balloons and UFOs are a distraction, in part from this story. Look up there in the sky, not down there on the floor where this terrible train wreck has happened. I know loads of you are intrigued by the environmental damage that it's caused, some calling it a new Chernobyl. I was chatting to Tim Poole earlier today. He's on the show tomorrow or Friday. We're doing the show with Tim, and he was saying that it's affecting, many people are saying that it's affecting water supply there. It's absolutely awful disaster. But what we want to talk about is, could this disaster have been avoided? And it's so often the case that these disasters, when investigated, come down occasionally to human error, and we're all human and we can all make mistakes. But in this instance, it seems that cost-cutting measures were implemented that could have been avoided. And it's a matter of record that Joe Biden reneged on his promise to ensure that train workers were properly paid, given proper packages that included like rest time and remuneration. Let's have a look at the story from that perspective, the potential blame that the Biden administration must bear. For unionised rail workers, the train derailment exposes systemic failures in a railroad system that is driven by profit, not safety. It should be driven by safety. Continually, remember, when new advances are presented to us, whether it's digital ID cards or medications, it's always for safety. Safety and convenience, these are the buzzwords. If you're watching this anywhere other than Rumble right now, we'll only be able to stay with you for another few minutes. Click over and watch us on Rumble, because that's when we'll be talking about that WHO story. Better still, join the locals community. You'll love it in there. I see them there chatting away. No, they're chatting about war and profit. They're on topic, thank God, for once. Hey, so listen, last year, railroad workers in the United States were on the cusp of a strike. Workers were demanding more sick leave to combat the effects of precision-scheduled railroading, a corporate scheme to cut costs by demanding more work from fewer workers. An ongoing trend. There's the threat now of automation, enhanced robotics, and a general sense that most people are losing their power, even the power of their labour. You'll notice there's strikes in the agricultural, industrial, and travel fields across the world. Sri Lanka, Germany, our country right now, there are loads and loads of strikes in the health industry and the railway industry because people aren't being paid enough. It's not treated correctly generally. Joe Biden and the US Congress blocked rail workers' right to strike by rapidly passing legislation that forced workers to accept an agreement without sick days. That can't be right. An agreement that don't allow sick days.
Well, an awful lot of people are going to be sick now.
Because they're going to be chugging down toxic
fumes
in clouds. Oh, man, that's no good. Railroad Workers United argues that precision-scheduled railroading and the overworking, layoffs and lack of safety measures that unionised workers were fighting for last year were primary reason for the derailment, while opposing a plan that would have required them to spend $321 million to give workers 7 paid sick days. That's not that many. That's reasonable, I would have thought. Is it?
Yep.
The main railroad companies raked in more than $7 billion in profits and paid out over $1.8 billion in dividends. Again and again, we hear stories, don't we? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments, where...
I would not call 7 days a year reasonable at all. Oh, hello, welcome. I just seen your message. The time did it happen? I walked away for a second. Okay, just a minute ago. Well, welcome to the show. We are watching the news with Russel Brand. What was I saying though? Okay, yeah. 7 days. They denied them 7 days of freaking paid time off. And I'm pretty sure that was per year. That's such a small amount. They call that reasonable. I would say that's still unreasonable. Unreasonable to deny him that, but super unreasonable. Super unreasonable to deny him that, but still unreasonable just even if that's all they got. It's crazy. Absolutely freaking crazy.
Profit is prioritized over safety and even efficacy. But that profiteering is no doubt connected to this disaster.
Yep.
I heard somewhere, Gal, that some of the tech that them railroads are using was like General Custer's tech, like Civil War type stuff.
Yeah, it was ancient tech, and what they needed was new technology for like the braking systems, and that was something that was lobbied against. The same kind of lobbyists that are giving $13 million to Congress and making sure that Biden pushes through this bill to make sure that these railroad workers can't strike.
But who's to say that a train having brakes is necessary anyway?
So screw your ability to unite, screw your time off, and screw your safety. Jeez. These people do not care.
Anyway, this train being able to stop, for example, may not have been of any use in stopping it from spilling all those harmful toxins all over the country you live in, if you're in America, and the planet you live on, wherever you are.
So
right
this is like a literal deadly manifestation of what happened in Congress a few months ago. You get something whereby money funneled to the right people, pushing the president to make a certain decision, punishing people who he vowed to give sick days to, a pledge that he gave when getting into office to become president in the first place. Now manifesting in this situation where not only wildlife, but some of these toxic fumes are carcinogens linked to various forms of cancer. It's like a huge thing that they're saying is actually could be worse than first reported.
Throughout the pandemic, we had caused to question the impact that pharmaceutical lobbying money had made on the decision to fund that process in the way that it was funded and the kind of regulations, if not legislation, that was passed. Now we can see once more the negative impact of lobbying money on the lives of ordinary Americans. If you believe, like we do, that the practice of lobbying should simply be ended, then let me know in the chat and the comments. And what would be the impact of that if lobbying, the practice of lobbying itself, was outlawed, banned? What difference would that make to the kind of policies that were passed? And also, would it be a policy that was beneficial to ordinary Americans while being punitive to corporate America?
So actually, yeah, absolutely yes. So we did a study on this recently. Actually, I don't know how recent it was. It might have been like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. But not that old. Anyway, they did a study saying that the public opinion of certain laws, or not certain laws, of laws of any given law, public opinion of any given law had very little to do with whether or not a law would be passed. And they like it's a huge scientific breakdown on it. I don't remember a lot of the details, a lot of the numbers they used, but point is, public opinion had very little to do with whether or not a law would get passed. What did have a very high determining factor for whether or not a law got passed was congressional opinion. So the people that are supposed to be representing us, it's their opinion that are deciding what passes and whatnot, and not public opinion. There's a complete disconnect there. They're supposed to be representative, but they're not representative. If they're having differing opinions, like they're regularly having different opinions than the majority of people, and they're deciding what passes, and regular people are not. Then further into that, so tying back to this whole lobbying thing, congressional opinion was heavily swayed, and it could be tied directly back to monies thrown into lobbying. So those things that received the most funding via lobbying were those things that actually got their laws passed. So I think it's a blatant, obvious truth that removing lobbying, or at least businesses' abilities to fund lobbying endeavors, would dramatically shift our entire freaking governmental structure in the United States. but chances of getting that to happen are slim to none. Unfortunate.
Okay, hey, listen, I think we've got to go over to Rumble now. We can carry on talking about that railway, and in a minute we're going to be talking to Bob Roth, my meditation teacher. He had his work cut out, get me to sit still and shut up and repeat a mantra inwardly until consciousness became impersonal and connected to the limitless cosmic consciousness that some people believe underwrites all reality as a kind of unitary force, or in a simpler, shorter word, God.
He's got very sparkly eyes as well.
Yeah. Noel Fielding, I introduced him to the British comedian and my mate Noel Fielding one time. And Noel Fielding, like, he was going, do you want to learn to... Noel Fielding did this impression after. He goes, bloody hell, that Bob Roth's a bit intense, isn't he? He came up to me and was going, do you want to learn to meditate? And go, no, you're all right, mate. Reorganising the molecules in my face with your eyes.
They're pretty amazing eyes.
They're beautiful peepers that Bob Roth's got. And if you don't meditate yet, you might need to, because Bob Roth believes we're globally suffering from PTSD, a trauma culture on our prison planet. Now, right, should we come off of Rumble? We're going to only be on Rumble now, because I want to talk about this thing. Like, if you're watching this on YouTube, click over to Rumble, because I want to talk about the WHO dropping the Wuhan lab investigation. And I'm going to express myself freely, so join us on Rumble right now. Right, I'm sick of this. After all that time saying they was going to find out where it came from, how come they're dropping the investigation? And I'll tell you, I'll help you. I'll tell you where it came from. It came out that lab. It came out that lab where you were funding Eco Health Alliance and various other American interests, where they changed their air conditioning unit, where people were off sick with weird coffee colds just months before. It came from there. You yourself were discussing it. The Fauci emails revealed that. It come from that lab. All we're discussing now is how bloody deliberate it was, in my opinion. Like, was it bioengineering? That was one of the other potential theories for its origin in the early days. Natural origin, bioengineering, lab leak. Them were the three theories, couple of those theories. Costly ones that blamed science, the very science industry that stood to profit from the whole farrago. Those two theories withdrawn, leaving a rather wacky theory called it came from that market down there, poo-y, stinky old frothy old wet market with them weird slimy flat fish with that little armadillo thing in a bamboo cage. That was the theory that won through in the end. I think after all this time, the WHO that wants to surveil you, that's what they're pushing for, global surveillance for future pandemics. Instead of surveilling people, surveil the people that caused this pandemic. Can't just say it's too hard, can you, Gal, and give up on the whole scheme?
No, I mean, you know, those emails that I think it was Jimmy Tobias who came on our show last week. Jimmy Tobias, you know, he came on and...
Why are you saying his name like that?
Well, we thought he might sound like that, but he didn't in the end.
He was like a little Lego fella. Right. I liked him a lot. I'm not being rude about him.
He's brilliant.
I loved him.
So, yeah, he uncovered these emails, didn't he, between, like, Fauci and other people, including Sir Jeremy Farrar, who's now, like, you know, head up at the... Well, WHO.
The head scientist at the WHO was Jeremy Farrar, and I think we should start framing him as like another Fauci.
Yeah, well, he was the one who came on the telly and said, if you're unvaccinated, it's a winter of death for you and everyone else. You know, that's him, isn't it?
No, I thought that was
is that a different one?
The chief of staff. Jeremy Farrar, I think.
Correct. But that's right.
Jeremy Farrar, I've seen him down that WF mouthing off, saying, "Oh, I've got all the answers."
Yeah, that's him. He very much pushed the theory that it came from the wet market, though, didn't he?
Did he?
Yeah, at the start of the pandemic.
Come from
so
that
there was him.
market.
There was people from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was like a who's who involved in these emails that they were all discussing whether or not this came from the wet market or not. They went with. It definitely came from the wet market. They pushed that. The WHO said at the time, oh, we are definitely investigating it, even though it turns out, I mean, I don't know if you want to read a couple of these things, Russ, or not. Yeah, why not?
Well, I just want to do this joke first. I've been thinking about for a moment. You said it's like a who's who of things.
Nice.
I wanted to say, like, what if it was a Guess Who, and you had to go, is it Anthony Fauci? And you click them down, like the game Guess Who, which I don't know if you have in America, but it's a game I kind of like.
I played that as a kid.
Yeah, that game.
Guess Who?
But it'd be quite easy.
Lab leak.
Yeah.
Click
One of them's those little armadillos.
Them little armadillos. Leave them up. I still think it could be them. So here is that story from The Intercept, read out in a grown-up manner. According to a recent report, Dr. Anthony Fauci conspired with influential scientists around the world, including Sir Jeremy Farrar at the World Health Organization, to quell concerns that SARS-CoV-2 may have leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. An academic paper, The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2, published in March 2021, definitively propped up the rival theory to the lab leak theory that SARS-CoV-2 had natural origins, but behind the scenes, the authors themselves were taking the possibility that the virus escaped from a laboratory more seriously. Why would they entertain it more behind the scenes? And because the WHO set the guidelines on YouTube, that's just a fact that YouTube use when it comes to health matters, and in particular the pandemic, the guidelines set by the World Health Organization. So we literally can't talk about the WHO abandoning this investigation with, openly on YouTube.
Yeah,
That's
also, isn't it just a massive thing? Like the origins of this. This is like one of the main things that we all want to know. It's like it's the foundation of this whole thing. Where did it come from? Like things have been redacted. Even when we're talking about Jimmy Tobias before, it's like he had to go through thousands and thousands of redacted documents and freedom of information requests, even to find out that these emails existed between Fauci and that. It should be the basis of what we understand about the pandemic.
And if you call yourself the World Health Organization, you can't say, we can't keep looking into where that pandemic come from. It's exhausting.
It's time to move on.
Let's think about something else now.
Let's think about surveillance.
Surveillance. And the next pandemic, where's that going to come from? Well, this is their job if you call yourself a World Health Organization. Let's see what this story is all about then. They've released the latest draft of its own international pandemic treaty, which will give the unelected Global Health Agency new sweeping surveillance powers if passed. The treaty requires the WHO's 194 member states, which represent 98% of all the countries in the world, to strengthen the WHO's One Health surveillance systems. So they want to surveil us, not only for COVID, but for flu.
Yeah.
And essentially they want biometric control and insight into your innermost secrets. It's only a matter of time before probes are introduced, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this the other day, and some of the ability that they're going to have is to legalize these things, is to create law. So like we were mentioning that, this is an unelected body who are now going to be heavily funded by Bill Gates, essentially, who are now going to be able to essentially create laws for the rest of us. It's worrying.
Do you think it's right? Let me know in the chat and the comments if you think it's right that Bill Gates, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and another body as well, funds that WHO. That WHO is then, if democratically endorsed, but only by its member states, by its own emissaries, will be able to introduce laws that will affect your life, that your country will have no choice but to obey. Isn't this what we most fear about globalism? The loss of individual freedom, the loss of national sovereignty, the loss of democracy itself. Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. This is where we can cultivate new, more sophisticated views by listening to you. We care about what you think. Time now for our presentation. Here's the news. Now, it's interesting this because it's a presentation on who profited from the pandemic. Yeah. Two of the voices that were most prominent in setting policy, in determining public response, in deciding who were outcasts, who was to blame, who we should listen to, what organizations should profit. And remember, there was a wealth transfer of $5 trillion, all in the direction of the elites, that took place during that period. Who, in particular, profited? Well, we've got two very surprising little culprits in our presentation. Here's the news. Oh no, here's the effing news.
Here's the fucking news. Real fucking news.
No, here's the fucking news.
You know what I miss? The pandemic. It was brilliant, wasn't it? The $5 trillion wealth transfer. Can't remember which direction it went. The depression, the closure of small businesses. Wouldn't it be mad if we found out that the very people that were recommending the measures and medicines for that pandemic were the people that benefited? That would actually make me quite angry. Hey! You remember the pandemic, don't you? Yeah, I was shut in my house. I was shamed. I had to take medicine. I mean, there's lots of things that I won't go into too much detail about, but are emerging slowly over time, as you told us and we reiterated they would. You were right. You knew you were right. Well, now guess what we can tell you? Some of the people that were most front and center, visible, lionized, celebrated and hero worshipped throughout that pandemic, guess what? Guess what? They profited from it. They made new money that they would not otherwise have made had it not been vaccine for that pandemic, and for me, that means they profited from the pandemic. Let's get into this story. Hold on to your hats and keep your botty hole tightly shut. Okay, for a start, do you remember when Bill Gates said this?
This is a great vaccine. It looks like almost all the vaccines are going to succeed. It is great science, great industrial manufacturing.
There's the old media nodding.
Everyone who takes the vaccine is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission.
That's right. That's what it's doing. Mainstream media just nodding away.
To other people and allowing society to get back to normal.
All nice and normal, where there's a $5 trillion wealth transfer to the most powerful interests in the world. Let's see how that happened. Bill Gates secured hundreds of millions of dollars in profits from his foundation's impeccably timed investment in BioNTech, the Pfizer partner for its mRNA COVID shots. I'm going to invest in BioNTech now, before dramatically reversing course and proceeding to openly cast doubt on the whole of mRNA technology. I just went for dinner with that mRNA technology. I didn't know what it was doing. Gates turned his $55 million vaccine investment in Pfizer partner BioNTech into over $550 million in just under 2 years. But before you get cynical, think of the amount of help that he's going to be able to give people. The Gates Foundation banked roughly 200...
Oh, that was a callback to the, what's the dude's name? The big pedophile scandal guy. Oh, I can't think of his name right now. You know, with the freaking lolly plane. I don't know why he wouldn't say Jeff Bezos. That's the Amazon guy. Crap, man. Ugh. Okay, it'll come back to me later.
$60 million in cash from the stocks, with $242 million being untaxed profit, given that the money was invested through the foundation. That doesn't account for the additional 2 million shares that the Gates Foundation sold prior to that from its original pre-IPO equity investment. In the Q3 2021 sale, the Gates Foundation secured a return of over 15 times more than its initial investment. Over the next quarter, Gates unloaded over 1.4 million shares of CureVac, banking an estimated $50 million. Bloody hell, this is such good news for philanthropy everywhere. We're all going to be fine. Bill Gates made 2022's biggest charitable donation. See, I told you were wrong to question Bill Gates. Biggest charitable donation. How much have you given to charity? Do you fly around the world in a private jet, telling people not to fly around the world on private jets and giving big charity? No, I didn't think you did. Right, so shut up then. Topping the Chronicle of Philanthropy's annual list,
Jesus.
Gates, who is topping that list of sly bastards? No, I'm sorry, did I say sly? Philanthropy list. Who's topping that philanthropy list? Topping the Chronicle of Philanthropy's annual list, Gates gave $5 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to back the grant makers' work in global health development, policy and advocacy, and US education. So let's put aside our cynicism, because he's made the biggest charitable donation in the world, $5 billion, and he's given that to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Wait a minute. If I got this pen and I gave it to Russel Brand, wait a minute, I've still got the pen, look! Look, there it is, in my hand! Sounds a bit, to the layman, probably my lack of education, that Bill Gates gave a donation to himself, untaxed, and that can't be the reason, would it? Hold on a minute, is this whole thing a tax evasion scheme? Answer in the chat. I'm certainly not saying that. Another great hero of the pandemic. You love him, I love him, we all love him. Let's, in fact, dance around singing his name and get badges of him on ourselves. It's Anthony Fauci.
You want to be a dead end to the virus. So when the virus gets to you, you stop it.
Yeah. Get that virus and stop that there. Get the vaccine, it stops transmission. And certainly no one's going to question that. An investigation by Open the Books found that Anthony Fauci and the NIH received and hid $350 million of royalties from pharma companies. In 2021, the National Institutes of Health, Anthony Fauci's employer, doled out $30 billion in government grants to roughly 56,000 recipients. However, Open the Books found hundreds of millions of dollars in payments also flow the other way. Oh wow, like a revolving door between the NIH and the pharmaceutical companies? That sounds weird. These are royalty payments from third-party payers. Think pharmaceutical companies, for example, back to the NIH and individual NIH scientists. Well, that was back then. It was a crazy time for all of us, the pandemic. I remember having a mental breakdown. So let's put all of that behind us and all of your suffering as well, because Anthony Fauci now is showing his true colours with his Anthony Fauci is charging as much as $100,000 for speaking engagements months after leaving his position in the Biden administration. Yeah, but remember when he would stand behind Trump and sort of go, That's a real hero. The former director of the NIAID's listing on leading motivational speakers is listed under the motivational speakers and healthcare speakers categories. Certainly motivated me to do a lot of things. I got quite cross. Were there any voices that were more significant than the voice of Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci during the pandemic? They set the narrative, they set the measures, they ultimately decided what direction things went in. The only voices of rebuttal and dissent came from what was called conspiracy theories, you know, like Joe Rogan having Robert Malone on, stuff like that. Now let's get into this article, which takes us the whole way through the pandemic from a position of good faith belief in the measures, i.e. it's a unique situation, we've got to do what we can to handle it, to where we are now. This is from that conspiracy theorist journal, Newsweek. And in it, a madcap conspiracy theorist, Kevin Bass, MD, PhD student at medical school in Texas. He's in his 7th year. Sorry, I get confused when it's not convenient and I sometimes jumble those terms up. As a medical student and researcher, I staunchly supported the efforts of the public health authorities when it came to COVID-19. I believe that the authorities responded to the largest public health crisis of our lives with compassion, diligence and scientific expertise. I was with them when they called for lockdowns, vaccines and boosters. I was wrong. We in the scientific community were wrong and it cost lives. Do you remember all the times you said, I wish that they would just have an open conversation. I wish they would admit when they were wrong. I wish that they would admit that following the science is sometimes difficult because the science is a subset of corporatist interests. Natural immunity, vitamin D, none of those things were being discussed. Why?
Hold on. There's a huge, so I mean, we can see like the corporate, like, so people that make the vaccines and do the research and development and whatever are working for companies. So you can see the corporate overlap. There's also the governmental overlap, because it's scientists that do things like research, you know, what the next pandemic's going to look like, research climate and whatever. And then these agendas are often things that require, government intervention on. You know, if we're going to make some kind of concerted effort towards climate, that's going to have to be, some laws and government funding going into that. So, I mean, it's not only a collusion of the corporate, it's a collusion of the political as well, for sure.
What was being discussed? Is there anything about what was being discussed and suggested that ties it into another narrative? Profitable? I can see now that the scientific community, from the CDC to the WHO to the FDA and their representatives, repeatedly overstated the evidence and misled the public about its own views and policies. There's your moment, conspiracy theorists. Hope you enjoyed it. Now get on and believe what you're supposed to believe about war or China or balloons or whatever, including on natural versus artificial immunity, school closures and disease transmission, aerosol spread, mask mandates, and vaccine effectiveness and safety, especially among the young. Basically, all of it. All of these were scientific mistakes at the time, not in hindsight. Amazingly, some of these obfuscations continue to the present day. There are things that are true that we are not allowed to say on YouTube, because YouTube take WHO guidelines as their own guidelines. I don't know what that is, but it ain't good. That's why we're on Rumble. But perhaps more important than any individual error was how inherently flawed the overall approach of the scientific community was and continues to be. It was flawed in a way that undermined its efficacy and resulted in thousands, if not millions, of preventable deaths. Hold on a minute. It's not like we're seeing excess deaths everywhere, so... What we did not properly appreciate is that preferences determine how scientific expertise is used, and that our preferences might be, indeed our preferences were, very different from many of the people that we serve. We created policy based on our preferences, then justified it using data, and then we portrayed those opposing our efforts as misguided, ignorant, selfish, and evil. If you were saying that at the time, well done. I'm afraid that's all it's going to be. There's no medal or anything like that. It's just well done. And perhaps just bear that in mind going forward. Also, good luck getting your small business back on track, because that money's gone to Amazon now. What a coincidence. We made science a team sport, and in doing so, we made it no longer science. It became us versus them, and they responded the only way anyone might expect them to, by resisting. We excluded important parts of the population from policy development and castigated critics, which meant that we deployed a monolithic response across an exceptionally diverse nation, forged a society more fractured than ever, and exacerbated long-standing health and economic disparities. So in a sense, the conversations that we were having, that Joe Rogan was having, those were exactly the conversations that needed to take place. And importantly, as the writer here says, you need needed open-mindedness and conversation, not contempt and condemnation, not certainty and rigor, not alloying medical and scientific procedures to political beliefs. That's ideology. That's not experimentation. That's not science. And now that this has happened, what's required is an assessment and an address and an attempt to redistribute and right the wrongs that took place during that period. Our emotional response and ingrained partisanship prevented us from seeing the full impact of our actions and the people we are supposed to serve. We systematically minimized the downsides of the interventions we imposed without the input, consent, and recognition of those forced to live with them. In so doing, we violated the autonomy of those who would be most negatively impacted by our policies: the poor, the working class, small business owners, blacks and Latinos, and children. These populations were overlooked because they were made invisible to us by their systematic exclusion from the dominant corporatized media machine that presumed omniscience.
So, once again, the marginalized were marginalized. Big surprise there.
Ultimately, everything that we were saying has proven to be true over time. Many of us did not speak up in support of alternative views, and many of us tried to suppress them. When strong scientific voices like renowned Stanford professors like John Ioannidis, Jay Bhattacharya, and Scott Atlas, or of University of California, San Francisco professors Vinay Prasad and Monica Gandhi sounded the alarm on behalf of vulnerable communities, they faced severe censure by relentless mobs of critics and detractors in the scientific community, often not on the basis of fact, but solely on the basis of differences in scientific opinion. When former President Trump pointed out the downsides of intervention, he was dismissed publicly as a buffoon. And when Dr. Anthony Fauci opposed Trump and became the hero of the public health community, we gave him our support to do and say what he wanted, even when he was wrong. But he's making a lot of money from those public speeches now, so it's not all bad news. Trump was not remotely perfect, nor were the academic critics of consensus policy. But the scorn that we laid on them was a disaster for public trust in the pandemic response. Our approach alienated large segments of the population from what should have been a national collaborative project. When you start to accept that this analysis is correct, you have to also suspect that they knew that they were doing that and didn't care, or it served the agenda they were pursuing so effectively that they were unable to resist it. I think ultimately the elite institutions of media, corporatism and government benefit from a divided population. So a situation like this was beneficial, and we paid the price. The rage of those marginalized by the expert class exploded onto and dominated social media. Lacking the scientific lexicon to express their disagreement, many dissidents turned to conspiracy theories and a cottage industry of scientific contortionists to make their case against the expert class consensus that dominated the pandemic mainstream. I would say that it wasn't an expert class. It was a one-sided cadre of experts being utilized to underwrite a required agenda and a preset objective to ultimately facilitate the wealth transfer that we've already described, and as always takes place, whether there's a pandemic or not, the advance of the interests of the powerful. Simply put, the pandemic provided a lens to help us witness what ordinarily happens but is not so easily observable. Labeling this speech misinformation and blaming it on scientific illiteracy and ignorance, the government conspired with big tech to aggressively suppress it, erasing the valid political concerns of the government's opponents. This isn't just happening in the pandemic. This is happening now. This is happening around the war and in general around the mainstream centralist narratives we're invited to accept as true. The point of our entire channel and community, in fact, is to oppose these narratives, not just with regard to the pandemic. And in fact, the reason we're still talking about the pandemic when it's largely accepted that, broadly speaking, it's over, is because we are determined to use this example to create a new dialectic. So in the future, you don't accept that anymore. Oh, you can't say that about Ukraine. That means you don't support Ukrainian victims. You can't say that about the balloon. That means you don't support... No. We don't accept that anymore, because we've seen in a concentrated time period, the way you come out is we're certain we've got the science, you lot are all hillbillies and nutters and conspiracy theorists. We've seen now that wasn't true. They were wrong. Not only that, we were right. Most of it was common sense conjecture and a set of principles around individual and community freedom. Those are the things that came to the forefront. Those are the things you cared about. Those are the things we still care about. And don't worry, because those things are still valid, and they're going to be more and more valid as what I call the establishment continues to amplify its need for control in the service of corporate interest. Now, you can use that as a utensil to analyze any news story. Hang on, this balloon story, are they going to use this to generate funding and impose control? Yeah, down the line, almost certainly. The war with Ukraine, are they going to to use that. Climate change, are they going to use that? So now you can just sort of stick relatively firm. It's a good thing, because now you know you were right. So you're able to go, oh, good, I'm not crazy. So what's necessary is you continue to support our channel, you continue to support one another, you continue to communicate, and you stay firm and strong. Don't turn into a nutter. Don't start thinking, oh, well, if this is true, then probably that's true. They can get you on that. But if you stick to the facts, then ultimately the truth will win out. And this despite the fact that pandemic policy was created by a razor-thin sliver of American society, or an elite, who anointed themselves to preside over the working class, members of academia, government, medicine, journalism, tech, and public health, who are highly educated and privileged. From the comfort of their privilege, this elite prizes paternalism as opposed to average Americans who laud self-reliance and whose daily lives routinely demand that they reckon with risk. That many of our leaders neglected to consider the lived experience of those across the class divide is unconscionable. Incomprehensible to us due to this class divide, we severely judged lockdown critics as lazy, backwards, even evil. We dismissed as grifters those who represented their interests. We believed misinformation energized the ignorant, and we refused to accept that such people simply had a different valid point of view. We crafted policy for the people without consulting them. If our public health officials had led with less hubris, the course of the pandemic in the United States might have had a very different outcome with far fewer lost lives. Instead, we have witnessed a massive and ongoing loss of life in America due to distrust of vaccines and the healthcare system, a massive concentration in wealth by already wealthy elites, a rise in suicides and gun violence, especially among the poor, a near doubling of the rate of depression and anxiety disorders, especially among the young, a catastrophic loss of educational attainment among already disadvantaged children and among those most vulnerable, a massive loss of trust in healthcare, science, scientific authorities, and political leaders more broadly. So there you are. That is a voice from within the scientific establishment telling you what you already knew. And beyond that, lives were lost. There was a financial cost, there was a health cost, there was a social cost, all stuff that we were discussing throughout this pandemic, because Bill Gates personally benefited, Anthony Fauci personally benefited, big tech benefited hugely, the government benefited, big pharma benefited, and ultimately, what is a crisis other than an opportunity for the powerful to double down on their interests and increase their power, to increase their authority, to eliminate the opportunity for dissent, to smear opposing voices. All of this we've seen take place over the pandemic, but this takes place across culture, across society, all of the time anyway. So stay alert and stay awake, and more importantly, if you can, stay free. And give us a little comment in the chat. I'll be reading them in a second.
Thank you for choosing Fox News. It's already been almost an hour.
The fucking news.
That's crazy.
Lead Belly Dan
so
says, it's not
engaging.
right
Don't
for
even
Bill
talk about
Gates
it,
to
you know.
control the WHO, Russ. Gabriel's59, it's about having non-elected officials controlling countries, Russell. God's word is life says, who elected Gates? Matthew Blackman, never let a good crisis go to waste. Pauline Kosh, oh my God, Russell's outfits. What do you mean about that? Don't you think I look so cool? Here I am. This is me. Can I be seen differently if I move about like that? In particular, the pockets. Look at me move around. Yeah, I'm loose, man. Hey, I was thinking we should start having Dan operate a camera in here.
Is that, I mean, that's a chat for after the show, but is that a dressing gown?
Don't know. That's a shaman's garb.
Ah.
And on the subject of shamans and their garb, we've got a fantastic guest on the show now. As I've already told you, if you've been concentrating, Bob Roth is a teacher, a great teacher of transcendental meditation. If you're wondering why you're suffering in this world, it might be because you're not accessing the limitless power that is already within you and around you. Bob is the CEO of the Lynch Foundation, that's set up by David Lynch, of course, and the author of Strength in Stillness and Change Begins Within. How many books does Bob Roth write? Here he is, Bob Roth. Welcome to the show.
It's wonderful to be here. I have a question for you.
Yes.
I'd like to see your closet. All these different outfits over all these years. Where do you store them all? How many hangers do you have?
I give them away, actually. Like, I mean, I can't keep hold of stuff. Sometimes I'll keep a particularly precious pair of boots, like worn at the VMAs or something, or these blood-spattered Converse trainers that I once wore at the Edinburgh Festival when I sort of got injured in what I might call a fracas. So, but most of my clothing is it goes into what I call the circle of life.
Oddly dressed people walking around Oxfordshire.
Yeah, if you look.
Gareth, I just imagine like just rows and rows and rows of Russell's clothing. Anyway, yes, Russell.
Don't
nice
imagine that. Don't cultivate a relationship with limitless consciousness and then imagine a cupboard, Bob. That's no way to treat consciousness.
It's nice to connect, Russell. It's nice to connect.
I love you as well, Bob. You can't win the compassion war with me. I'm very compassionate and loving person. Now, Bob, people watching this
Also
will be
humble, I'm
disenchanted
sure.
and disillusioned with establishment power, globalist elitism, the inability of any democratic process to deliver the will of ordinary people, the failure of our economic and political institutions. They will be looking for hope. How, Bob, do people heal from the struggles of this world? And how does the personal and spiritual journey interface with the necessary collective change that needs to be instantiated if we're to be pulled back from the brink of the apocalypse?
Okay, and we have how many days so to talk about this? So the thing is, I was a student at the University of California in Berkeley in 1968, and I had many, many friends who were working at that time to make changes, to overturn the government, to do all these different things. And I saw them 10 or 15 years later, completely burned out, Russell, completely burned out, just either sold out or just gave up. And I think when you're talking about the kinds of changes that you're promoting or bringing to light, working in communities, it takes an amazing amount of energy and resilience and focus and flexibility. And you can't burn yourself out. And I think one of the most important tools that anybody can have who's trying to enact change in the world, systemic change in the world, they have to be able to access within themselves what you described, that limitless field of energy, creativity, intelligence within. It's not a woo-woo place. It's a very real experience that comes about through different approaches. I know through transcendental meditation. Are you waving your finger? You want to talk, or should I continue?
Oh, I'm listening to you. I was readjusting this microphone. Go on, you say you know through transcendental meditation.
Through transcendental meditation. And the key thing is there's now this enormous amount of scientific research that shows that meditation, properly understood and practiced, is very empowering. It's very strengthening. It's very fulfilling. And I think it's the basis for any kind of change that a person wants to facilitate in the outer world.
The people that perhaps need it most, not to suggest that we don't all need to have a relationship with this limitless power that grants us the insight that what we perceive as total reality is but a fragment of it. The people that perhaps most need this access are unlikely to need it, and unlikely to access it. I mean, people that are really busy or people that are really suffering. Those seem to be people that find it difficult to make space, make time to meditate. That's before you get into sort of desperately poor folks.
Yeah, but the thing that we're working on now with the David Lynch Foundation is we're working with insurance companies and private insurers, self-insurers, and like Aetna and Blue Cross Blue Shield in the United States, and Medicare, is to have the meditation reimbursed by the insurance companies. So people can learn it and have it prescribed by a doctor and then have it reimbursed by insurance companies. And then we're also working with schools, hospitals, businesses to set aside a meditation room where a person can do their meditation when they get to work, before the day begins, or before they go home at night. Now, I want to make a very strong point. There's some criticism that, meditation is like the opiate of the masses. There's changes that have to take place in business, they have to take place in the world, and so you meditate and then you forget about all the issues or concerns. That's not transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation is not an escape from anything. Transcendental meditation is a preparation for activity, for that resilience and that creativity and that clarity of mind and that inner fulfillment that we need in order to make sustained change in our own lives and in society as a whole. So we understand that it's very hard for anybody to find time, but if we make meditation times available in the workplace, right now, for example, in New York City alone, we're offering transcendental meditation for free in about 50 hospitals, frontline doctors and nurses, and who are working in the ICU units and emergency rooms. And they have increasingly setting aside places for them to take 20 minutes to meditate.
Bob Roth, sometimes when I hear about measures like enabling people to work, to meditate within workspaces, or indeed the advance of allowing or facilitating insurance payment for transcendental meditation as a health measure. I can see that that is, to a degree, progress. But what I note is it is change within the accepted parameters of a very, very powerful system. And it seems to me that at this point, we need disruptive change, confrontational change. This is a time where spirituality needs to be brought to the forefront, not to be regarded as a supplement to the accepted and understood presumed conditions of our late capitalist culture that is underwritten by individualism, materialism, atheism. I feel sometimes that we ought be more radical and disruptive in the way that we present these ideas. How do you and how did the Maharishi square the necessity for fitting in with secularism with the requirement to disrupt this machine that appears to be driving us to extinction?
Subtle ways
I think disruption has to take place in both ways. That's why I started off saying that we want to bring meditation to the disruptors. That was the first thing I said. The people who are trying to enact the change, the radical revolutionary change that is needed, they'll burn themselves out. We'll burn ourselves out if we don't have some means to rejuvenate and regenerate ourselves. That's number one. Change also takes place from within. So I think when you have people who are meditating in a workplace or in a hospital, they're not becoming passive observers. They're actually able to take a more leadership role and guide those kinds of changes. And Maharishi himself was very radical. I mean, his assessment of the weapons industry, the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, the fact that the number 2 cause of death in hospitals, in healthcare, is iatrogenic disease caused by modern medicine. Number 2 cause of death caused by modern medicine. So he was slamming that. At the same time, the reality is work has to be done on the ground, whether it's from the outside, empowering people from the outside, or empowering people from the inside.
In our locals community, that's our members, and anyone can join that if they choose to. There's a link in the chat. Claire Tetras says, this is really resonating with me. Thank you so much, Bob and Russell and team. I'm a children's social worker and deliver different forms of therapy to traumatized children. I am totally burnt out and currently off sick. I practice yoga, but I'm very inconsistent with meditation. It's making me realize how much I need to prioritize it so I can serve others. Thank you. How do you recommend that people prioritize their meditation and ensure that it's scheduled and kept? What about those outliers? People like Jerry Seinfeld that never misses a session. People like Lynch that never misses a session. People like you that's probably sneakily meditating below the waist right now. What do we do and how do we become more like you?
Jesus.
I think that it's just inevitable that a person has to have the desire that they want to learn to meditate. I mean, the thing is there's this wonderful ancient proverb where you see a person running. There's a burning little house, a hut that's burning, and then there's a big building down there, and you see a person running. And are they running towards the big house, or are they running away from the burning hut? And so stress, trauma, we're living in if you want to say a pandemic, uncontrovertibly, unarguably, this is a pandemic of stress, toxic stress and trauma that's in the world today. Whether you look at what's the number 2 cause of death among teenagers is suicide, and the rates of addiction, you know all those numbers. So the fact of the matter is, human beings want to get away from suffering, just like that wonderful woman's comment. You want to get away from a migraine headache. You want to get away from insomnia. You want to get away from constant anxiety. Now, yes, change has to take place in the structures of the organizations or the institutions. But in the meanwhile, we also have to take care of our own health, or else we'll die. So I think it's a self-motivation. People, when the time is right, some people...
I also think that you need a much larger body of individually motivated and highly active and properly directed human beings. And you're not going to get that through some activist agenda or some new law or the creation of a new organization or a business or any of those kind of things. The only way you're going to get that kind of change, getting more individually motivated and highly active people as a whole, just existing and doing their thing in the world is through the empowerment of people. And I think meditation is a really good place to start with that. I absolutely do think so.
Never miss a meditate. Russell, you're pretty darn good with your meditations.
Yeah, I regularly meditate. I always meditate in the morning. I put aside half an hour. I sometimes meditate later in the day. I would love to make it part of our practice here at work. A lot of us get very stressed. It's a very demanding work environment. Some say that much of that stress emanates from a very particular and very unusually dressed coordinate. I would like us to be able to make TM part of what we do here. Have you seen it succeed in workplaces? Have you seen it successfully scheduled?
Well, I mean, even David Lynch, you know, and the group that's around him, they all meditate. Very creative people find it necessary. Deirdre Parsons, who you know and we love, runs the David Lynch Foundation in the UK. And she can arrange to teach everyone in your office. And I have to tell you, she's been doing amazing work in the UK with the foundation. She's brought it to people, about hundreds of people who drive ambulances, people who are veterans, people who are on the front lines in hospitals. There's a big research study going on at the University of Cambridge right now on TM and the brain. All of this let me pause and say, you don't like it so much or often when I talk science, but the fact of the matter is, as you well know, there is no difference. It's a continuum. Pure spirituality and pure physicality, it's a continuum. There's no difference. If I see something traumatic in my mind, it shakes me to the core of my being. If I have a spiritual experience, it shows up in the way my brain is functioning. And that's what they're finding. So when one sees that a person's blood pressure went down or they have less anxiety, they're sleeping better, in a technique that is, you could say, is good for health, but also develops consciousness, then you can see there's something very profound going on, because it's just a purely mental technique that changes all levels of life. So I didn't want you to give me a bad time on the research.
I appreciate the research and its necessity. I suppose I don't see it at odds with mysticism, and I know that Maharishi was himself a scientist, and I recognize the value. And in fact, the way we frame our information is evidence-based, empirical, well thought out arguments. We don't sort of stray into the conspiratorial unless it's for sort of good fun and good humor, and it is necessary.
15 years later, completely burned out, Russell, completely burned out. Just either sold out or just gave up. And I think when you're talking about the kinds of changes that you're promoting or bringing to light, working in communities, it takes an amazing amount of energy and resilience and focus and flexibility. And you can't burn yourself out. And I think one of the most important tools that anybody can have who's trying to enact change in the world, systemic change in the world, they have to be able to access within themselves what you described, that limitless field of energy, creativity, intelligence within. It's not a woo-woo place. It's a very real experience that comes about through different approaches. I know through transcendental meditation. Are you waving your finger? You want to talk, or should I continue?
Oh, I'm listening to you. I was readjusting this microphone. Go on, you say you know through transcendental meditation.
Through transcendental meditation. And the key thing is there's now this enormous amount of scientific research that shows that meditation, properly understood and practiced, is very empowering. It's very strengthening. It's very fulfilling. And I think it's the basis for any kind of change that a person wants to facilitate in the outer world.
The people that perhaps need it most, not to suggest that we don't all need to have a relationship with this limitless power that grants us the insight that what we perceive as total reality is but a fragment of it. The people that perhaps most need this access are unlikely to need it, and unlikely to access it. I mean, people that are really busy or people that are really suffering. Those seem to be people that find it difficult to make space, make time to meditate. That's before you get into sort of desperately poor folks.
Yeah, but the thing that we're working on now with the David Lynch Foundation is we're working with insurance companies and private insurers, self-insurers, and like Aetna and Blue Cross Blue Shield in the United States and Medicare, is to have the meditation reimbursed by the insurance company. So people can learn it and have it prescribed by a doctor and then have it reimbursed by insurance companies. And then we're also working with schools, hospitals, businesses to set aside a meditation room where a person can do their meditation before, when they get to work, before the day begins, or before they go home at night. Now, I want to make a very strong point. There's some criticism that, oh, meditation is like the opiate of the masses. There's changes that have to take place in business, they have to take place in the world, and so you meditate and then you forget about all the issues or concerns. That's not transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation is not an escape from anything. Transcendental meditation is a preparation for activity. And nurses.
It's underwritten by individualism, materialism, atheism. I feel sometimes that we ought to be more radical and disruptive in the way that we present these.
Number 2 cause of death in hospitals, in away from the burning hut. And so stress, trauma, we're living in and if you want to say a pandemic, uncontrovertibly, unarguably with your meditations.
Yeah, I regularly meditate. I always meditate.
David Lynch Foundation in the UK, and she can arrange.
It's for sort of good fun and good humor, and it is necessary to adopt the lexicon of our day. But I suppose that there's something about new age rhetoric, and I know that I lapse into this myself sometimes, that makes it feel like we're doing this just to somehow be more attractive or more effective in the workplace, rather than change the paradigm entirely. And that's sort of the thing I return
And I
to.
think it's simultaneous, though. You do it too. You pick certain words in your conversations that resonate with people, that people understand, and you could use other terminology, but there's certain terminology you use, and I think it's not to water anything down. It's like, let's not let vocabulary get in the way of a transcendent experience. Yeah. Once you have that transcendent experience, once you have that experience of that inner calm, that silence that lies deep within everyone, then it leads to freedom. You're talking about stay free. Yeah, meditation is a very important way to stay free.
When Rick Rubin came on, he was so passionate about meditation.
That was a great interview, by the way, a great interview.
Yeah, thank you. He's such a beautiful example of it. When we, of what meditation grants people, wisdom, insight, ease, grace. And sometimes I even think that of you, Bob. Not right now, though, when you're coming across a bit aggressive.
Am I being too aggressive?
Yeah.
Am I being... Just a tad aggressive.
Mean-spirited. What about Gareth and the people that work here? They need to learn to meditate. Look at Gareth.
Call Deirdre. She'll come and teach you all.
What are your questions about meditation?
Yeah, no, I was really interested in what you were saying there, Bob, especially when you mentioned, I know it's obviously an awful subject, but things like suicides and depression. And obviously, one of the issues with the pandemic, one of the more, I suppose, unspoken manifestations of some of the measures, you could argue, certainly the lockdowns and some of the things that they created, was this huge spike in depression and suicides and all sorts of other, dreadful things. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about the kind of methods that we were kind of encouraged to use as coping mechanisms through the pandemic, rather than turning to, so it was things like turning to fast food and being able to easily order things from Amazon and things, rather than a more holistic approach that you're talking about here, which is about methods where we can attain some kind of freedom even when we're locked inside our homes.
I think ultimately a person has to make a decision themselves, stay free. They have to say, enough of this, enough of what the mainstream media is telling me, enough. And Russell makes that point, and you, Gareth, makes that point very clearly. I want to take a different path. I want to pursue a different route. I want to do my own research about what's going on with government. I want to do my own research. I want to forge my own way. And that's also true with something like meditation. So do I really believe fast food is the solution, ultimate solution? Oh, here's a tool that's ancient. Transcendental meditation is thousands and thousands of years old. There's nothing new here. The idea is that, that ocean analogy, choppy waves on the surface of the ocean, but the ocean is silent at its depth. And the mind is the same. The surface of the mind is the monkey mind, or the active thinking, gotta mind. But deep within every human being, there's this ocean of consciousness, this silence, this peace, this power, this energy. And throughout time, people have been accessing that. It was lost for hundreds of years, and look what's happened to the world, or thousands of years, look what's happened to the world. And now it's coming back, and it will completely transform the human being, and the human being will completely transform society, because society is, as you know, the expression of the human being. And if we can have human beings living higher states of consciousness, which just means healthier, more integrated, more intuitive states, then society will reflect that. So
More intuitive states.
we have
I
to
like
work
that
on both levels.
Bob, I'd love to have you come on for a longer conversation. If we can schedule it, it would be wonderful to spend more time speaking with you. Also, when we're in the United States, where I'm doing 2 stand-up shows, as a matter of fact, one in Florida, one in Los Angeles, I would love to meet up with you and to meditate and stuff if you have time, or you're not wrapped up in your own concerns, your own giddy carousel of endless selfishness and hedonism that has come to define you.
It's just terrible. It's just terrible. Russell, I would love to spend time with you. It would be great. I mean, we've known, what is this, 14 years now or something?
Bob, each day I mark on my wall with a penknife a groove.
Every day.
Another day that I've been friends with Bob Ross.
How's Babs?
My mother is doing very well, thank you. Probably all meditate more.
I love your mother.
She's a beautiful woman, isn't she?
Oh. As is Lauren, your girls. But give my love to them all, but Babs.
I think we're getting off track now, Bob, with your
Sorry.
I love you, Bob Ross. I'll see you in America. And I'll see you soon. I love you, mate. Take care.
Okay, love you too. Love you, Gareth. Thank you.
Bob.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Bob Roth. You can follow Bob Roth on Instagram at MeditationBob and find out more about his work at meditationbob.com if you want to learn to meditate. I know that the David Lynch Foundation are eager to provide free meditation.
It just makes me think of Circus Bob and The Simpsons.
To people who can't afford it. It's a beautiful organization. Hey, we've got a lovely show for everyone tomorrow.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
No. I was just thinking when you were talking then.
What were you thinking about?
I guess, we get told a lot, don't we? You get asked a lot, what can we do? What are the solutions?
Yeah.
How can we challenge power?
That's right.
And I guess meditation maybe is one of those ways that it doesn't seem like you're directly changing power. But if you're changing yourself, if you're kind of creating a strength in yourself, that then multiple people and communities are doing it at the same time, I guess maybe what Bob's saying there is we'll be more ready to affect change. And I thought that's where it can be like a really useful tool.
I often think about that.
I'm ignoring the glasses.
Thank you. I often think about, you're too kind. I was thinking about the example of the tulips. The tulips temporarily became central to Dutch economics, and then people instantaneously lost interest and they became almost without value. Tulips were changing hands for thousands of pounds. People talk about it as an example of inflated value quite a lot. I'm also thinking recently about, remember that story that we covered about that game store that was going to get shut down, and people started to artificially inflate its price, which is probably, as I understand it, common practice in the financial industry and a fundamental aspect of like global finance. But it makes me recognize that all systems are a reflection of human consciousness and our facilities, our humors, our tendencies for good or bad, jealousy, greed, kindness, love. And the technique of meditation, I suppose, if it changes your individual consciousness and it changes the individual consciousness of enough people, we could have talked about him, but if we'd have talked to him longer, they conducted experiments. You can look this up in Chicago where they had people in their hundreds meditating. It affected the crime figures. You can look at this stuff. It's like that consciousness is a continuum. Bob sometimes, I guess, is reluctant to get into the mystical aspects of it because I feel like they popularize it, as is perhaps necessary in this climate, with some of the more easily, rationally explained functional aspects of meditation, you will feel better, you will feel more effective. And I guess what I'm always pushing for, what I want is real change, probably because I want real change in myself, but certainly I want it in the world also.
But I can see that if you don't have people focused on just what's right in front of them, or what they're kind of angry about necessarily, or what they want, or what they desire, or all the distractions that we're offered to stop us thinking about how are you going to create change. Actually, just think about this. Worry about the culture war, buy some stuff from Amazon, think about some celebrities on Instagram, rather than actually what Bob's saying is focus on what's real, what's inside you, and therefore you will create the focus to actually make real change rather than being distracted by all the bullshit.
You know that I'm using this as part of an underlying campaign to make meditation mandatory here.
I'll be into it.
And then doing it on locals and stuff, do just 20-minute meditations. What is good is no one gets to talk.
Meditation for everyone.
Silent. Unlike this show, join us tomorrow. Stacey Malkin, who exposes corporate wrongdoing. Oh, yes, she does. And government failures in public health will be joining us for a conversation on Friday. An amazing conversation with Tim Poole. He's talking about global destabilization and the collapse of faith in institutions. Also, join up to Locals. That's our community. If you join Locals, I do a weekly meditation. In that one, I do talk because I get someone, right? You'll love this gal. And I talk to them about their problems. Is it heartbreak? Is it grief? What is it? And then we do a guided meditation.
Can't be me every week.
You again. What is it this week? It's heartbreak again. Oh, God. No. Oh, hello. Grief this week. Oh, for God's sake. Do your job. Yeah. We do that once a week. If you join us on Locals, I might pick you and we'll do a meditation together. Plus, we've got a stand-up special that we've made. It's fantastic. It's ever so funny. We'll be putting some clips out soon and you'll get that and you'll own it. It's the only place you'll be able to access it at first. You can download the podcast. There's a beautiful exclusive with a conversation we had with Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist.
Whoa. Uh-oh. Well, they were basically done anyway. That's all, folks. The news. She is done. Now, I must decide what is going to happen next. Or I could not make up my mind or stream. I will have to try to do so now. But I'm going to take a couple minutes. Hell, BRB. Okay. It has been decided. Rather than do something for the next 30 minutes, because we're already down to that time, I'm actually gonna go ahead and stream now. But then, in just 2.5 hours, we will start up a new stream and do some actual gaming. We're gonna play some WoW. And maybe do some React with it. We're gonna focus on playing some WoW and having a good time. So that's gonna be, like I said, like 2.5 hours from now. So it is. Oh, sorry. It is 10:30 PST. We will be back at 1 o'clock PST. Okay, bye for now. Bye bye. Can't remember what my wave button is. Bye bye. Nope, not that one. Not that one. Is it this one? Nope, we're close though. We're close. Hold on. Bye bye. Bye. Later.